They laughed at his hands, scarred, calloused, and stained with the oils of 1,000 tiny wars fought with gears and springs. They called him a relic, a ghost haunting the polished halls of a world that had long forgotten him. That was their first and last mistake. The air in the Palexpo Convention Center in Geneva was worth more than most people's homes. It was a filtered, climate-controlled atmosphere, thick with the scent of money, Swiss precision, and the faint, metallic tang of ambition. This was the Grand Prix de Horlogerie, the Oscars of watchmaking, and the men who walked its halls were titans, collectors, and CEO who spoke in seven-figure terms. And then there was Elias Vance. He moved through the glittering crowd like a shadow, an old man in a threadbare tweed jacket that had seen better decades. At 82, his steps were slow, deliberate, each one a quiet protest against the hurried, self-important pace of the world around him. His face was a road map of a life lived with quiet intensity, but it was his hands that told the real story. They were the hands of a laborer, a mechanic, a man who had spent a lifetime wrestling with things smaller than a human heartbeat. They were scarred, the knuckles swollen, the skin a tapestry of faint cuts and dark stains. In a room where manicured fingers gestured towards glass cases of diamond-studded timepieces, Elias's hands were an anomaly, a piece of raw, unpolished history. He wasn't here to buy, he was here to remember, to feel the pulse of the world he had once belonged to before it became a playground for billionaires and influencers. He stopped before a display by a modern, avant-garde brand. The watch inside was a chaotic marvel of exposed tourbillons and sapphire crystal. A young man in a suit, no older than 30, glanced at Elias's hands and offered a tight, condescending smile. "May I help you, sir, or are you perhaps lost?" The service corridors are that way. Elias didn't flinch. He simply gave a slow nod and moved on, his gaze sweeping the room until it landed on the centerpiece of the entire exhibition, the private collection of Alistair Sterling. Sterling was new money, but he'd bought his way to the top with the ruthless efficiency of a shark. He wasn't a connoisseur, he was a conqueror. He collected watches not for their history, but for their price tags, their exclusivity a testament to his own importance. At the heart of his collection, nestled on a velvet cushion under a cone of perfect light, was the Meridian. It wasn't the most expensive watch in the room, but it was the most legendary. A one-of-a-kind piece from the 1890s, its creator officially unknown, lost to time. It was a masterpiece of astronomical complications, a symphony of gold and blued steel that was said to keep time with the stars themselves. Elias stared at it, his breath catching in his throat. He saw not an object of wealth, but a story, a legacy, a promise. Sterling himself was holding court nearby, a glass of champagne in one hand. He was loud, brash, his laughter echoing off the high ceilings. He caught Elias staring. "Ah, another admirer," Sterling boomed, walking over. He glanced at Elias's simple attire, his worn shoes, and his eyes landed, as they always did, on his hands. A smirk played on Sterling's lips. He leaned in, speaking to his entourage, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's fascinating who you find at these events. Even the help wants a look." The jab landed. The small circle of men around Sterling chuckled. Elias's jaw tightened, but his eyes never left the watch. He could feel the heat of their stares, the weight of their judgment. Sterling, emboldened by his audience, stepped closer. He tapped the glass case housing the meridian. "This, my friend, is something you'll never touch. A piece of history for men who make history, not just clean up after it." He gestured dismissively at Elias's hands. "Hands like yours, they build things, I'm sure, but they don't hold things like this." Elias met his gaze. For the first time he spoke. His voice was a low rumble, like stones shifting in a deep riverbed. "You're right," Elias said, the words hanging in the air. "Some things are not meant to be held, they are meant to be understood." Sterling scoffed, turning away to dismiss him. As he turned, his cufflink, a gaudy diamond stud, snagged the edge of his sleeve. He gestured grandly, and his arm swept out, knocking a heavy catalog off a nearby pedestal. It hit the corner of the Meridian's glass case. A crack, not loud, just a sickening, sharp sound that cut through the murmur of the crowd. A hairline fracture appeared on the case's surface. But inside, something worse had happened. The jolt was just enough. The ancient, delicate mechanism, a system of gears and levers balanced on a razor's edge for over a century, shuddered. The second hand of the meridian stopped. Time, for the most priceless watch in the room, was broken. And Alastair Sterling had no idea that the only man on earth who could fix it was the man whose hands he had just mocked. Panic is a cold, creeping thing. For Alastair Sterling, it began the next morning in the hushed, sterile environment of a Swiss restoration lab. The world's most renowned horologist, a man named Jean-Pierre Renaud, peered through a jeweler's loupe at the meridian, his face pale. "The mainspring is fractured," Renaud said, his voice barely a whisper. "But that is the least of your problems. The escapement, Monfordianus, the anchor pallet is shattered. This is not a repair, Monsieur Sterling. This is an exhumation." Sterling, who had built an empire on hostile takeovers, felt a tremor of fear. "Fix it. I don't care what it costs. The Phillips auction is in 3 weeks. It's the headline lot." Renaud shook his head, removing the loupe. His eyes were grave. "You do not understand the architecture of this movement. It is like nothing I have ever seen. The signature is unknown, the techniques are unorthodox. To rebuild this would require not a watchmaker but a ghost, the man who made it." "He's been dead for 100 years, Sterling snapped. "Precisely," Renaud said. "There was, however, one man, a legend. They said he could hear the soul of a watch, but he vanished decades ago, a recluse, an American." For the next week, Sterling's world became a frantic pilgrimage. He flew by private jet from Geneva to the hallowed workshops in the Vallée de Joux. He met with the master craftsmen of Patek Philippe, the technicians of Vacheron Constantin. They all looked at the meridian with a mixture of reverence and terror, and they all said the same thing. "The techniques are not ours. There is a rhythm here, a fingerprint we do not recognize, and then always the name. You must find Vance, Elias Vance. He was the last of his kind. If he is still alive, he is your only hope." The search was humiliating. Sterling, a man who summoned people, was now begging for information. His calls were met with cryptic replies. His offers of money were met with silence. Elias Vance had no digital footprint, no public records beyond a birth certificate from 1943. He was a ghost. Finally, a breakthrough came from an old, retired parts supplier in a dusty corner of London. "Vance," the old man rasped over the phone. "He never trusted the big houses, said they stole the soul from the work. Last I heard, he had a little shop, a place for lost causes, somewhere in Philadelphia." "Philadelphia?" Not a glittering metropolis of high finance, but a city of grit and history. Sterling's private jet landed on a gray, overcast afternoon. He was driven in a black town car away from the pristine center city, deep into a neighborhood of brick row houses and forgotten factories. The car stopped on a narrow cobblestone street, and there it was. Not a boutique, not a gallery, just a small shop with a faded, hand-painted sign that read Vance and Son Horology for timepieces with a past. The windows were dusty. Inside, shadows danced among what looked like junk. Sterling, in his $1,000 suit, stood on the cracked pavement, the scent of rain and urban decay filling his lungs. He, the master of the universe, was about to beg for an audience with a man he had dismissed as the help. He took a breath and pushed open the door. A small bell chimed, its sound lost in the symphony of 100 ticking clocks. The inside of the shop was not like the polished, silent halls of Geneva. It was a cathedral built of time itself. The air was thick with the smell of brass, cleaning oils, and old, dry wood. Clocks of every size and era covered the walls, their pendulums swinging in 100 different rhythms, their ticking a chorus of managed chaos. Grandfather clocks stood like ancient sentinels in the corners. Cuckoo clocks, marine chronometers, and delicate carriage clocks lined shelves that bowed under their weight. Behind a long, scarred wooden counter, surrounded by a mountain of tiny drawers filled with gears, hands, and screws, sat Elias Vance. He didn't look up when Sterling entered. He was hunched over his workbench, a loop fixed to his eye, his large, scarred hands performing a delicate surgery on the exposed guts of a 1920s pocket watch. The hands Sterling had mocked now moved with a surgeon's precision, steady and certain. Sterling stood there, suddenly feeling like an intruder. The power he wielded in boardrooms and auction houses meant nothing here. This was a different kind of kingdom, and he did not know the language. "Mr. Vance," Sterling said, his voice feeling too loud in the ticking silence. Elias finished tightening a microscopic screw before slowly looking up. He removed the loop, and his eyes, dark and clear, settled on Sterling. There was no surprise in them, no anger, only a deep, unreadable calm. "Mr. Sterling," Elias said, his voice a low gravel, "you found me." Sterling's carefully rehearsed speech dissolved. He felt a flush of shame, hot and unfamiliar. I have a watch, the Meridian, it's broken." Elias nodded slowly, his gaze drifting back to the pocket watch on his bench. "I heard." The words hung in the air. "I heard." Of course he had. The watch world was small, and news of the Meridian's demise would have traveled like a shock wave. Sterling stepped forward, placing the velvet-lined case on the counter. He opened it. The Meridian lay inside, silent and still, dead. "They said you were the only one who could fix it. They said you were the best." Elias looked at the watch, his expression softening with a hint of sorrow, as if seeing an old friend who had been hurt. He didn't reach for it. He looked back at Sterling. "Being the best doesn't mean I'm for hire." Sterling's old instincts kicked in. This was a negotiation. He pulled out a checkbook. "Name your price." "I will pay anything. 100,000, 200. A blank check, just fix it before the auction." Elias looked at the checkbook, then back at Sterling's anxious face. And then he did something Sterling had never seen another man do. He smiled, a slow, sad smile. "You still don't understand, do you?" Elias said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of the ticking clocks around them. "You think your money can buy back time. He finally reached out, not for the watch, but to gently close the lid of its case. "My price is not something you can write on a check." Sterling froze. "What is it then?" Elias leaned back in his chair, the ancient wood groaning in protest. He folded his scarred hands on the workbench, the hands of a laborer, the hands of a king. "My price," Elias said, his eyes locking with Sterling's, "is that you listen. You will sit here in this shop and you will learn the story of the man you are holding in that box. You will learn the name of its creator, and at your auction, in front of your important friends, you will not be the one to speak. I will." Sterling was speechless. The man he had humiliated was now dictating terms that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with legacy. "With truth. And one more thing," Elias added, his voice dropping lower, "you will apologize, not to me, to my hands." For 2 weeks, Alastair Sterling, the titan of industry, sat on a rickety wooden stool in the corner of a dusty Philadelphia watch shop. He said nothing. He just listened. He watched Elias Vance work, not just on the Meridian, but on the dozens of other broken timepieces that found their way to his door, the family heirlooms, the forgotten treasures of ordinary people. Elias spoke as he worked, his voice weaving a story that stretched back over a century. He spoke of the true creator of the Meridian. His name was Marcus Thorne. He wasn't some famed Swiss artisan, Elias began, his hands carefully disassembling the Meridian's intricate movement. He was a black man from Baltimore, born in 1860. The son of a freed slave. No one would apprentice him. No one would teach him. They saw his hands and saw only the color of his skin, not the genius they held. Sterling listened, the world he knew, the history he thought he'd bought, slowly being dismantled before his eyes. "So Marcus taught himself," Elias continued. "He got books on metallurgy, on astronomy. He built his own tools. He worked in a shed behind a blacksmith's shop, and at night he would look at the stars and dream of capturing their movement in a machine. The Meridian wasn't just a watch for him. It was a statement. It was proof that a mind could be brilliant, a soul could be artistic, no matter the vessel it was housed in." Elias paused, holding a gear no bigger than a pinhead up to the light. "He finished it in 1892. He took it to the great American watch companies of the time. They were stunned by the craftsmanship, but they wouldn't put their name on a watch made by a black man. So he sold it anonymously to a European dealer. The history was erased. His name was forgotten. But he passed his knowledge down." Sterling finally found his voice. "How do you know all this?" Elias set the gear down and looked at Sterling, his eyes holding the weight of generations. He rolled up his left sleeve. On his forearm was a faint, intricate tattoo of a watch escapement, the exact design used in the Meridian. "Marcus Thorne was my great-grandfather," Elias said softly. "He passed the craft to his son, who passed it to my father, Vance and Son. The son was my father, learning from my mother's side. The knowledge of how to build and repair a Thorne timepiece has been kept in our family. It is not written in any book. It lives here." He tapped his temple, then held up his scarred hands. And here, Sterling was silent. The watch in the case wasn't just a collector's item. It was a piece of Elias's soul. It was a monument to a silenced genius. His humiliation of Elias in Geneva was not just an insult to an old man, it was a desecration of a hidden history. "Why?" Sterling asked, his voice hoarse. "Why fix it for me, after what I said?" Elias looked at the disassembled masterpiece on his bench. "Because this watch deserves to tell its story. It has been silent for too long. and you, Mr. Sterling, are going to give it the stage." The auction hall at Phillips was electric. The world's wealthiest collectors were gathered, their faces flushed with anticipation. At the front of the room, on a pedestal, sat the meridian, its second hand now sweeping in a smooth, perfect circle. It was alive again. Alastair Sterling sat in the front row, not with his usual swagger, but with a quiet, tense stillness. He looked pale. The auctioneer, a man with a silver tongue and a practiced smile, stepped up to the podium. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, the moment we have all been waiting for, Lot 37, the Meridian. A lost masterpiece, its creator unknown, a true enigma of horology. We will start the bidding at $5 million. A murmur of excitement went through the room. "Wait," a voice, calm and steady, cut through the noise. From the side of the stage, Elias Vance walked into the light. He was wearing the same tweed jacket, but he stood as tall as any CEO in the room. The auctioneer looked confused. "Excuse me, sir, this is a private event." Sterling stood up. "Let him speak," he said, his voice clear. "He is here at my invitation." A wave of confusion washed over the crowd. Elias walked to the podium, not with aggression, but with an unshakable dignity. He looked out at the faces, some of whom he recognized from Geneva. "My name is Elias Vance," he began. "You are here to bid on this timepiece, but you cannot buy what you do not understand, and you do not understand this watch." He gestured to the meridian. "You call its creator unknown, a mystery. A convenient lie that has stood for over 100 years. The man who built this watch was not a mystery. His name was Marcus Thorne. He was a black American genius, and his story was erased because the world was not ready to see brilliance in a man like him." A shocked silence fell over the room. Elias's voice rose, filled with the pride of 4 generations. He built this watch not as a luxury item, but as a testament to the idea that greatness is not confined by race, by status, or by the judgment of ignorant men. It is a testament that has been ticking in silence, waiting for its voice to be heard. He then looked directly at Sterling. "The current owner of this watch," he said, his voice devoid of malice, "did not know this history. He, like many of you, saw only an object of value, but he has since learned that some things are worth more than their price." Elias stepped back from the podium. The auctioneer was speechless. The collectors were stunned. In a single moment, Elias had not just repaired a watch. He had rewritten its history. He had reclaimed its soul. The Meridian was no longer just a rare antique. It was a symbol of buried black excellence, a cultural icon. The auctioneer, finally recovering, stammered, the bidding for the Marcus Thorne Meridian will now begin." The first paddle shot up. 10 million, another. 15, the price skyrocketed, doubling, then tripling its estimate. Sterling didn't bid. He just watched, his face a mask of complex emotions. He had acquired a priceless object, but in front of the entire world he had been stripped of the one thing he craved, the appearance of knowledge and true power. Elias had taken that from him, not with anger but with truth. Elias didn't stay to see the final bid. He slipped out of the auction house and walked into the cool night air. He didn't care who bought the watch. Its story was finally free. Weeks later, he was back in his shop in Philadelphia. The ticking of the clocks was his only company. On his workbench lay a small, framed photograph. It was old and faded, showing a proud, serious-looking black man with intelligent eyes holding a pocket watch. Marcus Thorne. A package arrived that morning. Inside was a velvet box, not from Sterling, but from the anonymous buyer who had won the auction. Elias opened it. It wasn't a watch, it wasn't money, it was a key. Attached was a note. Mr. Vance, a foundation has been established in Marcus Thorne's name to support young, overlooked artisans of color. This is the key to their first workshop, fully funded. Thank you for reminding us that the best stories are not the ones we buy, but the ones we have the courage to tell. Elias held the key in his scarred hand. He looked at the photo of his great-grandfather, and for the first time in a long, long time, a tear traced a path through the lines on his face. He hadn't just fixed a watch, he had corrected history. Some victories are not loud. They tick quietly in the hearts of those who know the truth, and in that quiet they are eternal. Some men collect objects, others collect dignity. Only one of them is priceless.